Welcome to Co-Pilot Podcasts. Since 1790, the United States has granted more than 12 million patents. 12 million. And yet, as the country turns 250 this week, there's a very real argument that the most important parts of that innovation story have never actually been told. Today, we're getting into 250 years of American technological innovation, where it came from, how it reshaped the entire world, and what this birthday moment is forcing us to reckon with about who actually built all of it. By the end of this episode, you'll understand the institutional machinery behind US tech dominance, the geopolitical stakes of maintaining it, and why the semi-quincentennial is as much about correcting the record as it is about celebrating it. My co-host has been deep in the research on this one, so let's just get right into it. Walk me through what's actually happening this week.
So July 4th, 2026 is what's officially being called the semi-quincentennial, America's 250th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. And the scale of what's being organized around it is genuinely unlike anything the country has done before.
Semi-quincentennial. That's a word I had to look up, not gonna lie.
Right, it's a mouthful. But what's interesting is that the official America 250 Commission, which is a nonpartisan body, has made innovation the absolute centerpiece of the celebration. Not just fireworks and concerts, though those are happening too, but a whole initiative called America Innovates, founded in partnership with Leidos, that's been running tech expos and a national startup competition for college students throughout 2026.
So it's not just a birthday party, it's more like a national audit of what the country has actually built.
That's a really good way to put it. And the America Innovates Expo in May, hosted in partnership with Forbes, featured the Forbes list of 250 greatest living American innovators. Free, open to the public, for all ages. It was framed as an immersive walkthrough of innovations past, present, and future.
Okay, so before we get into the geopolitics and the competition with China and all of that, can we just ground this? Like, what does 250 years of American innovation actually look like as a through line?
Yeah, so Iming USA put together a really useful timeline for this. The story starts with something almost mundane, interchangeable parts, pioneered by Eli Whitney, which revolutionized manufacturing by enabling standardized production. That sounds boring until you realize it's the foundation of every assembly line, every mass-produced product, everything.
So the iPhone in your pocket traces back to Eli Whitney. That's kind of wild.
In a very real way, yes. And then you move through the Industrial Revolution, General Electric, Bell Labs, Ford, and then World War II accelerates everything. The Manhattan Project, radar, early computing. Military funding through the Department of Defense drives aerospace, semiconductors, computing. And then the Cold War and the space race pour massive investment into science and technology education.
The moon landing in 1969 being the obvious peak of that era.
Exactly. And what's underappreciated about the moon landing is that it wasn't just a historic milestone. It spun off technologies in computing, materials, and telecommunications that shaped the next 50 years. According to UPPCS magazine's analysis of U.S. tech leadership, that's a pattern. Crisis or competition forces investment, and the spillover effects reshape civilian life.
And then you get to the institutional side of this, because it's not just about individual inventors, right? There's a whole system.
This is where it gets really interesting. The USPTO, the United States Patent and Trademark Office, describes itself as America's innovation agency. And since the first Patent Act was signed by President George Washington in 1790, the U.S. has granted more than 12 million patents and registered more than 7 million trademarks. That's the infrastructure of innovation.
12 million patents. That number is almost impossible to visualize.
And alongside that, you have agencies like DARPA, NIH, and NSF providing federal funding for cutting-edge research, while private sector giants like Apple, Google, Microsoft, and Tesla complement those government initiatives. According to UPPCS magazine, the U.S. consistently invests more than 3% of GDP in R&D in technology-intensive sectors. That public-private synergy is genuinely unique.
And the venture capital ecosystem is a big part of that too, right? Like, that's not something you can just replicate overnight.
Exactly. The U.S. has this venture capital culture that encourages high-risk, high-reward bets. That's not how most countries fund innovation. Most countries are more conservative. The willingness to fund something that might completely fail and then fund the next thing, that's a cultural and economic feature, not just a financial one.
Okay, so we've got the institutional machinery, we've got the historical through line, but here's what I want to push on because there's a really uncomfortable question sitting underneath all of this celebration. Who actually gets credit for 250 years of American innovation?
Yeah, this is where the 250th anniversary gets genuinely complicated. And there's a really striking data point from the 2026 TAF Status Index, that's the Asian American Foundation's annual survey, that found 53% of American adults couldn't identify a single major moment in AAPI history.
Wait, more than half of Americans?
More than half. And a 2024 TAF survey found that more than half of Americans couldn't name a single famous Asian American. And yet, the USB was invented by Ajay Bhatt, an Indian-American engineer. YouTube was co-founded by Steve Chen. Yahoo was co-founded by Jerry Yang. These are not minor contributions to the technology landscape.
The USB, like the thing that is literally in every device on the planet.
The thing that is in every device on the planet. And the response to this gap is actually one of the more interesting cultural moments happening around the 250th. The Asian American Foundation and Wong Fu Productions launched a YouTube series called The United States of Asian plus America, specifically to spotlight these AAPI pioneers whose contributions helped define America, but whose stories remain largely overlooked.
And the series premiered with a conversation between YouTube co-founder Steve Chen and Wong Fu Productions co-founder Philip Wang, right? That's a pretty powerful pairing.
It is. And future episodes will feature Ajay Bhatt, Jerry Yang, HIV/AIDS research pioneer Dr. David Ho. The series is essentially arguing that the innovation story America tells about itself is incomplete, and that 250 years in, it's time to fill in the gaps.
Only 7% of Americans believe AAPI communities have, quote, a great deal of influence on US culture. That's from the same Status Index, right?
That's right, 7%. Which is a pretty stunning disconnect from reality when you look at the actual list of innovations those communities drove. And it raises a real question about what the 250th anniversary is actually celebrating, the full story, or a curated version of it.
I want to come back to that. But first, there's this other angle I find really fascinating, which is what's happening with technology and how the 250th anniversary itself is being commemorated. Like, the celebration is being powered by the very innovations it's celebrating.
This is genuinely one of the more meta things happening right now. According to Tech Vision Era, the semi-quincentennial has an unprecedented technological backdrop. We're talking AI-curated digital archives, blockchain-verified heritage narratives, augmented reality experiences that let visitors walk through historical moments. Technology has become the infrastructure through which millions of people are experiencing American history.
So instead of a museum with plaques, you can ask an AI chatbot to trace the technological innovations that built American industrial power.
Exactly. And the Library of Congress has deployed machine learning systems to make sense of millions of pages of documents that would take human researchers centuries to fully catalog. These systems are identifying patterns across centuries of American history, tracking how ideas migrate, how technology spread, how crises reshape governance.
That's actually kind of incredible. But it also raises a question. Who controls the algorithm? Because the platform that controls how history gets told shapes how future generations think about national identity.
Tech Vision Era makes exactly that point. They describe it as strategic, not nostalgic. Silicon Valley, government agencies, and cultural institutions are all competing to define how Americans understand their own past. And the challenge they flag is algorithmic bias, the risk that AI systems encode existing gaps and blind spots rather than correcting them.
Which loops right back to the AAPI story. If the AI is trained on the existing historical record, and the existing historical record undercounts AAPI contributions, then the AI just amplifies that gap.
That's the tension. And it's one of the more uncomfortable things sitting underneath all the celebration. The tools being used to tell the story of American innovation could either correct the record or calcify it.
Okay, let's shift to the global picture. Because the 250th isn't just a domestic moment, it's happening at a really specific geopolitical inflection point for US tech leadership. What's the actual state of play?
So here's the headline from MITRE's 2024 analysis on US science and technology competitiveness. 8 of the 10 largest tech companies worldwide by market capitalization are American. Over half of the top 20 universities are in the United States. Since World War II, the U.S. has been the dominant leader in science, technology, and innovation.
8 out of 10. That's a pretty commanding position.
It is. But MITRE is also very clear that this is not a stable position. China has made enormous advances in scientific research and the development of emerging technologies. And in some areas, some with dual-use military and civilian applications, China has actually surpassed the United States.
That's a sentence that would have been unthinkable 20 years ago.
Right. And Dr. Georgiana Shea, writing in The National Interest, frames it as a contest for information dominance that goes beyond economic competition into strategic and national security superiority. She specifically calls out China's Zhujiang quantum computer, which has surpassed classical supercomputers, and DeepSeek, an AI model that rivals the most advanced generative AI systems.
So the stakes aren't just market share, they're about who sets the rules.
Exactly. And this is where a really important piece of academic research comes in. A 2024 paper published in International Affairs by researchers including Madeline Carr looked at the geopolitics of technology standards. Who gets to set the rules for how emerging technologies work globally? And their finding is that the US became a dominant force in this field by establishing a technological order that best promoted its own interests.
Standard setting. That sounds dry, but it's actually enormous, right? Like, whoever sets the standard for how 5-gram works or how AI systems are governed, that's real power.
It's enormous. The International Affairs paper argues that geopolitical competition increasingly revolves around harnessing emerging technologies, and standard setting is a central element of that competition. And what's happening now is that China is developing political and economic space for a Chinese-led alternative to the US and EU-dominated system.
So the 250th anniversary is happening at this moment where the US is simultaneously celebrating 250 years of building that system and facing the most serious challenge to it in its history.
That's the exact tension. And Maitre's memo is pretty direct about it. They say the actions taken in the next 4 years will define American national security and economic prosperity for decades. The priorities they flag are AI, biotech, semiconductors, telecom, and quantum computing.
And China is producing more engineers annually than the US. That's from Dr. Shea's analysis in The National Interest, right?
That's right. China's investment in STEM education, producing more engineers annually than the US, directly challenges American technological leadership. And Dr. Shea argues that US education policy needs to proactively emphasize AI, cybersecurity, and quantum computing across K through 12 and higher education to maintain a competitive pipeline.
Which is interesting because the America Innovates initiative is doing exactly that at the cultural level, running a national startup competition for college students, trying to inspire the next generation of American innovators.
America Startup, yeah. It's a fast-paced, high-stakes competition inviting college students across the country to pitch bold ideas and early-stage ventures for funding, mentorship, and national recognition. It's the America 250 Commission's bet that the next chapter of American innovation starts with the people in the room right now.
I want to go back to something Tim Cook said in Time magazine's piece for the 250th, because I think it captures something important about how the tech industry is framing this moment.
Yeah, Time asked 25 tech insiders to name the innovation that most defines American life right now. And Cook chose the iPhone. He said, and this is a direct quote, "When iPhone arrived in 2007, it didn't just change technology, it changed how we live." Time had actually named it Invention of the Year that same year.
And his framing was less about the device itself and more about what it made possible.
Exactly. He said the most inspiring thing is what people have done with it, connecting with loved ones, improving health, building businesses, changing industries. And then he added that we're still at the beginning, that AI will unlock new possibilities, which is a very specific kind of optimism. It's not, look what we built, it's, look what's still coming.
And other tech insiders in that same timepiece were picking things like agentic AI, the idea that we'll soon have an infinitely scalable supply of intelligence deployed to perform real-world work. Tracy Chu said the first job humans have already ceded to AI agents is coding.
Which is a pretty significant statement. Coding was the domain of highly compensated software engineers, and now AI agents are doing it. That's not a future prediction, that's a present tense observation from someone inside the industry.
There's also this interesting counter-narrative happening around the 250th that I think is worth flagging, because not everyone is framing innovation as Silicon Valley and AI. Real Truck launched a campaign that literally redefines what AI stands for.
This is one of my favorite things happening around the 250th. Real Truck's campaign is called Built by American Innovation, and they're using AI as an acronym for American Innovation, not artificial intelligence. The campaign spotlights mechanics, welders, farmers, builders, people working in garages and on job sites. It's a deliberate pushback on the idea that innovation only happens in tech hubs.
And they're doing it through documentary-style films. One of the first episodes is about the restoration of the USS Texas.
Right. And I think that tension between the Silicon Valley definition of innovation and the hands-on, craft-based definition is actually one of the more interesting fault lines in how America is telling its own story at 250. Both are real, both are American, but they don't always get equal billing.
And the Lido's CTO, Ted Tanner, made a point at the America Innovates Expo that I think threads that needle pretty well. He said innovation's true value comes from the impact it creates, that the future belongs to those who can transform ideas into real-world solutions that improve lives.
That's a really important framing because it shifts the measure of innovation from what did you invent to what did it actually do for people. And that's a standard that applies equally to the iPhone and to a better truck bed cover.
Okay, here's something I keep coming back to. The America 250 Commission is doing this thing where they're partnering with NIST, the Library of Congress, and the National Park Service to preserve a snapshot of America at 250, not for us, but for America's 500th anniversary in 2276. Someone 250 years from now is going to open that and see this exact moment.
That's one of the more quietly profound things happening right now. And it raises the question, what do we want them to find? What story are we actually preserving? Because if the AAPI innovation gap is still in the record, if the contributions of people like Ajay Bhatt and Dr. David Ho are still footnotes, then that's what gets handed to 2276.
And the AI systems being used to curate that archive could either fix that or make it permanent.
That's the stakes. And it's why the TAF series and the America Innovates initiative and all of these parallel efforts matter. They're not just cultural programming. They're interventions in the historical record at the exact moment when that record is being digitized and algorithmically organized.
Let's talk about what the US actually needs to do to maintain its position. Because the picture you're painting is one where the lead is real but not guaranteed.
Mitra's analysis is pretty clear on this. They say the US needs to prioritize investments in AI, biotech, semiconductors, telecom, and quantum computing, foster public-private and international collaboration, and attract, train, and retain top STEM talent. That last one is interesting because it's not just about producing engineers domestically, it's about keeping the global talent that comes to the US to study and then often stays.
And Dr. Shea's piece in The National Interest frames the US advantage as being rooted in something China's state-controlled approach can't easily replicate: the dynamic ecosystem of private sector ingenuity, academic research, and government collaboration.
Right. The argument is that the US model, messy, decentralized, high risk, is actually a structural advantage. You can't mandate the next iPhone. You can't plan the next YouTube. Those things emerge from a culture that tolerates failure and rewards bold bets. And that culture is genuinely hard to engineer from the top down.
Although China is trying, the International Affairs paper notes that China is partly emulating the successful innovation policies of the US and EU while simultaneously building a parallel system.
Exactly. And that's what makes the standard-setting competition so important. Because if China establishes its own technological order, its own rules for how AI systems work, how data flows, how devices communicate, then the US model doesn't automatically win just by being better. It has to be adopted. And adoption is a geopolitical contest, not just a technical one.
So when you step back from all of this, the 12 million patents, the AAPI innovation gap, the AI archives, the China challenge, what does 250 years of American technological innovation actually add up to?
Here's what I keep coming back to. The Aiming USA timeline puts it simply. Innovation has remained one of the defining forces behind American economic growth for 250 years, from interchangeable parts to the iPhone, from the moon landing to agentic AI. But the 250th is revealing something important. The story of that innovation has always been bigger than the story America told about it.
The USB is in every device on the planet, and most Americans can't name the person who invented it.
And that gap matters, not just for fairness, though it matters for that too, but because the next generation of innovators needs to see themselves in the story. If 53% of Americans can't identify a single major moment in AAPI history,
then a huge portion of potential innovators are looking at a story that doesn't include them. And that's a competitive disadvantage, not just a cultural one.
The America Innovates initiative and the TAIAF series are both, in different ways, trying to fix that. One through a startup competition, one through documentary storytelling.
And both are betting that the next 250 years of American innovation depend on getting this right. The Leidos insight that technology alone isn't enough, that people drive progress, applies here too. You need the people, all of them. And that means telling the full story.
Here's what this really comes down to. America is turning 250 with a genuinely remarkable record, 12 million patents, 8 of the 10 largest tech companies in the world, the iPhone, the internet, the moon landing. And it's also turning 250 with a reckoning. The story it told about how all of that happened has been incomplete. The USB inventor, the YouTube co-founder, the HIV/AIDS researcher, these are American innovations built by Americans that most Americans can't connect to a name or a face.
And the tools being used to commemorate this birthday, the AI archives, the digital experiences, the algorithmic curation of history, those tools will either correct that gap or lock it in for the next 250 years. That's not a small thing. That's the whole ball game.
And meanwhile, the geopolitical stakes have never been higher. China is producing more engineers annually than the US, has developed quantum computers that surpass classical systems, and is actively building a parallel technological order. The US lead is real, but it's not automatic.
Which is why the America Innovate Startup Competition for college students isn't just a feel-good program, it's a pipeline bet. The argument is that the next chapter of American innovation is already underway. It just needs to be found, funded, and told.
So here's the closer. America has granted more than 12 million patents since 1790. But the most important innovation of the next 250 years might not be a device, or a platform, or a quantum computer. It might be finally telling the full story of who built the last 250 years and making sure the next generation of builders can see themselves in it. That's the bet the semi-quincentennial is making. And honestly, it's a pretty good one. Thanks for being here on Co-Pilot Podcasts.